Leo traced the rim of his chipped coffee mug, the ceramic cool against his worn fingertips. The coffee inside was weak, a pale brown ghost of the real thing, but it was warm. In his small, cramped apartment, warmth was a currency he understood. The single room served as his bedroom, his kitchen, and his living space. A thin mattress lay on the floor in one corner, a threadbare blanket pulled neatly over it. In the other corner, a small table and two mismatched chairs stood like lonely soldiers guarding a forgotten outpost. This was his life, a life measured in spare change and quiet dignity. He was a cleaner, a man who moved through the opulent spaces of the city like a phantom, erasing the smudges and footprints of the wealthy, leaving behind only the scent of lemon polish and his own invisibility. He didn't complain. His hands were calloused, but honest. His back ached, but his conscience was clear. He had enough. Just enough. But a cold knot of worry had been tightening in his stomach for weeks. His mother, Elena, she was living with his brother, Marcus. Marcus. The name tasted like ash and expensive cologne. His brother existed in a different universe, an ocean of luxury Leo could only glimpse from the distant shore of his own life. Marcus was a real estate magnate, a man who built shimmering towers of glass and steel on foundations of ruthless ambition. Leo worried because he knew his brother. He knew the cold, hard glitter in Marcus's eyes, a reflection of the skyscrapers he owned. He knew that for Marcus, everything and everyone had a price tag, a value. And he feared his brother had long since decided their mother was worthless. The shrill ring of his old plastic phone shattered the morning quiet. He picked it up, his heart thudding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. It was Marcus. "Leo." The voice was sharp, impatient, like the crack of a whip. "I'm having a party tonight, at the penthouse. Don't be late." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. "A party? Marcus, I don't think—" "It's for the Sterling Tower launch. All my investors will be there. I need you here." Leo frowned. "Why? You know I don't fit in with your friends." A sigh, thin and irritated, hissed through the phone. "Because Mother insists. She wants both her boys there. It's sentimental nonsense, but it will keep her quiet. Just show up. Try not to look like you sleep in a closet. And for God's sake, don't talk to anyone important." The line went dead. Leo stared at the phone. He felt the familiar sting of his brother's casual cruelty. Try not to look like you sleep in a closet. It was true, of course. His closet was a small rack of second-hand clothes, each item carefully mended and washed. His best shirt was faded. His only pair of decent shoes was scuffed at the toes. He looked around his humble room, a space his brother would consider smaller than a walk-in wardrobe. And yet, it was his. It was honest. He felt a surge of defiance. He would go. Not for Marcus, but for his mother. He would go to stand beside her, a quiet, unassuming shield against the cold world his brother inhabited. Later that day, as Elena was getting ready in her sterile guest room portion of Marcus's sprawling penthouse, she found it. Tucked away in the lining of her old, worn handbag was a forgotten letter. It was in her late husband's familiar, elegant script. Her Arthur. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it out. The paper was soft with age. She had read it 100 times after he passed, but had put it away years ago, the pain too fresh. Now, seeing it again felt like a sign. "My dearest Elena," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you are facing a trial. I pray you never have to, but I knew my boys. I knew their hearts. One gold, one glass. I have left you not a fortune, but a test, a key. Mr. Thomas holds the instructions. Trust him, and trust yourself. True wealth is not what we build for ourselves, but the shelter we offer others. Remember that, my love. Remember who you are. A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. A trial. Yes, that's what this was. Living in her own son's home like an unwanted ghost, a relic he was ashamed of. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her purse. A strange resolve settled over her. Tonight, the test would begin. The elevator to Marcus's penthouse was a mirrored cage, ascending through the heart of the city like a prayer to the god of money. Leo stood inside, feeling his reflection mock him. The faded collar of his shirt seemed to cry out its age. The worn leather of his shoes looked like old, tired skin. He felt like a stain on a white dress, a smudge on the perfect polished surface of his brother's world. The doors opened directly into the party. It was a sensory assault. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of 100 self-important conversations. A sea of black suits and glittering dresses churned under the soft glow of recessed lighting. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled below, a carpet of distant, insignificant lights. Marcus stood at the center of it all, a king in his court. He was holding a glass of champagne, his smile as sharp and brilliant as a shard of broken glass. He was flanked by men with predatory eyes and women with surgically perfected faces. They laughed at his jokes, a chorus of sycophantic approval. He saw Leo enter, and his smile tightened. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before being replaced by a mask of bored indifference. He didn't wave, didn't nod. He simply turned back to his audience, dismissing his brother's arrival, as one might dismiss a fly buzzing at the window. Leo's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for his mother. He found her near a large, abstract sculpture, looking small and lost. She was wearing a simple blue dress, the one she'd had for years, her silver hair neatly pinned. She held a glass of water, her knuckles white. She looked like a small, forgotten bird that had flown into the wrong garden. He started to walk towards her, a small boat navigating a hostile ocean. As he passed a group of laughing men, he heard a snippet of their conversation. "Marcus is a genius," one said, his voice slick with admiration. "Buying up the North Side district for pennies, those people won't know what hit them." "He has the killer instinct," another agreed. "No sentiment. That's why he'll own this city in 5 years." No sentiment. The words echoed in Leo's mind as he finally reached his mother's side. "Leo," she said, her voice a small island of warmth in the cold room. A relieved smile touched her lips. "You came." "Of course, Mom," he said softly, taking her hand. It felt frail in his. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, dear," she lied, but her eyes told a different story. They were shadowed with a deep, weary sadness. Just then, a waiter swerved past, carrying a tray of colorful, complicated cocktails. A guest, laughing too loudly at his own joke, stumbled backward, bumping into Elena. The glass of water slipped from her hand, splashing down the front of a woman in a stark white pantsuit. The woman gasped, a theatrical sound of horror. "My Elia, it's ruined." The music seemed to dip. Conversations faltered. All eyes turned to the small, mortified old woman and the dark, spreading stain on the pristine white fabric. Marcus spun around, his face a thundercloud. He strode over, his movements sharp and angry. He didn't look at the woman in white. He didn't look at the spilled water. He looked only at his mother, and his eyes were filled with a cold, venomous fury. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice low but carrying in the sudden silence. "Marcus, it was an accident," Elena whispered, her face pale. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" Marcus let out a short, cruel laugh. It wasn't a sound of humor. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut. "You're always sorry. You're a walking apology, an embarrassment." He turned to the room, his voice rising, theatrical and booming. "My friends, please, accept my sincerest apologies for my mother." He said the word mother as if it were a disease. "She doesn't get out much," he continued, a sadistic smile playing on his lips. "She's from a different time, a simpler time, a poorer time." The crowd shifted, a murmur of uncomfortable sympathy, not for Elena, but for Marcus, for having to endure such a clumsy, common relative. "Marcus, please," Elena begged, her voice trembling. Leo put a protective arm around her, his own body rigid with a silent, helpless rage. "No," Marcus said, pointing a finger at her. "I'm done. I am done cleaning up your messes. I am done pretending you fit in this world. You don't. You are a relic, a burden." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick money clip, and peeled off $200 bills. He didn't hand them to her. He threw them on the floor at her feet. "Here," he spat. "For a taxi. Go to a hotel. Go to a shelter. I don't care. Just get out of my life. I have spent years building this world, this name. I will not have you dragging it through the mud." The bills lay on the plush white carpet, stark and insulting. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and expensive. It was the silence of 100 wealthy people watching a public execution of dignity. Leo felt something inside him break. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowing his brother's casual insults, of watching his mother shrink in his brother's presence, it all shattered. He looked at the money on the floor. He looked at his mother's tear-streaked face. He looked at his brother's triumphant, cruel smile. Without a word, Leo knelt down. But he didn't pick up the money. He gently took his mother's hand, helped her step over the insulting cash, and guided her towards the elevator. He didn't look back. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room on his worn jacket, but he walked with a straightness he hadn't felt in years. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing them away from that cold, glittering world, he heard the first ripple of mocking laughter, led by Marcus himself. It was a sound that would be burned into his memory forever. The taxi ride to Leo's apartment was silent. Elena stared out the window, the city lights blurring through her tears. Leo held her hand, his own grief a hard, heavy stone in his chest. He paid the driver with the last of his cash for the week, the irony not lost on him. When they arrived at his building, the contrast with Marcus's penthouse was a physical blow. The hallway smelled of dust and boiled cabbage. The single light bulb flickered weakly. He unlocked the door to his one-room apartment. For the first time, he saw it through his mother's eyes. He saw the poverty, the struggle. He felt a hot flush of shame, but Elena didn't seem to notice. She walked in, looked at the small, clean space, and her shoulders, which had been hunched in shame all night, finally relaxed. "It's warm in here," she said softly. Leo's shame evaporated, replaced by a fierce, protective love. "I'll make you some tea, Mom," he said. He gave her his bed, taking the thin blanket for himself on the floor. As he lay in the dark, listening to the quiet, rhythmic sound of his mother's breathing, He knew he had done the right thing. He had nothing. But in that moment, he felt richer than his brother had ever been. He had accepted the burden Marcus had thrown away, and he would carry it with pride. The next few days were a quiet dance of shared poverty. Leo split his meager meals with his mother, giving her the larger portion. He went to his cleaning jobs with a gnawing emptiness in his stomach, but a fullness in his heart. Elena, for her part, seemed to find a quiet purpose in the small apartment. She mended his shirts with a skill he hadn't known she possessed. She insisted on washing the dishes. She brought a sense of home to a place that had only ever been a place to sleep. But a shadow hung over them. The humiliation of that night, the cruel laughter, the money on the floor. On the third day, after Leo had left for work, Elena sat at the small table, her husband's letter in her hand. She read the words again. A trial. A key. Mr. Thomas holds the instructions. It was time. She found an old phone book, and with a trembling finger, traced the listings until she found it. Thomas Gray, attorney at law. An hour later, a kind, elderly man with eyes that crinkled at the corners and a suit that was respectable but not flashy, sat in one of Leo's mismatched chairs. It was Mr. Thomas. "Elena," he said, his voice gentle. "I was so sorry to hear about Arthur, and I have been waiting for your call." "He said you had instructions," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I do," Mr. Thomas nodded. "Arthur was a brilliant man, and a deeply good one. He was also, forgive me for saying, exceptionally wealthy. He built a silent empire, investing in people, not just properties. He feared what his fortune would do to his sons. He saw the coldness in Marcus, even as a boy, and he saw the kindness in Leo. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a small, ornate brass key and a sealed document. Arthur set up a private trust. He called it the Eternal Legacy Account. It's held at the Grand Metropolitan Bank. This key, along with your signature, is all that's needed to access it. He stipulated it could only be opened if you felt one of your sons had failed a fundamental test of character." Elena looked at the key, glinting in the weak morning light. "Marcus. He threw me out, Thomas. He threw money at my feet like I was garbage." Mr. Thomas's kind face hardened. "Then the test is over, Elena, and Marcus has failed spectacularly." He leaned forward. "There is more. Arthur's silent empire includes controlling shares in a holding company called North Star Investments. Does that name mean anything to you?" Elena shook her head. "It's the primary financial backer for the Vance Real Estate Group," he said quietly. "Marcus's company." The air left Elena's lungs. Arthur secretly owned the bank that was funding his own son. He wanted to give Marcus a chance to succeed on his own merits, but he also built a safety net and a cage. Marcus has been playing king in a castle his father owned all along. A plan began to form, cold and clear as ice. "Mr. Thomas," Elena said, her voice no longer trembling, but firm with a newfound steel. "Please arrange a meeting at the bank tomorrow morning. And, if it's possible, please ensure Marcus is there to see it." The Grand Metropolitan Bank was a cathedral of commerce. Its lobby was a vast cavern of polished marble and soaring columns. The air hummed with the quiet, confident buzz of serious money. Leo stood beside his mother, feeling as out of place as he had at the party. He was wearing the same faded shirt, the same scuffed shoes. He didn't understand what was happening. His mother had simply told him, They had important family business to attend to. He had trusted her. As they stood uncertainly in the center of the lobby, a familiar, hated voice cut through the air. Well, well, what is this? A beggar's reunion? Marcus was striding towards them, a smug, contemptuous sneer on his face. He was flanked by two men in sharp suits who looked on with bored amusement. Look, gentlemen, Marcus said, gesturing to Leo and Elena with a flick of his wrist. The rest of my pathetic family. Come to beg for a loan? I'm afraid this bank doesn't deal in pocket change. Your credit score is probably 0. His companions chuckled. The sound was dry and cruel. Leo felt a hot surge of anger. He stepped forward. Marcus, that's enough. Enough? Marcus laughed, a loud, braying sound that turned heads. It will never be enough with you people. You're a black hole of need. Tell me, he said, leaning in conspiratorially. Did you sleep on the floor, Leo? I hope you gave Mommy the bed. It's the least you could do for the woman who ruined both our lives. He turned to the bank's branch manager, a man named Mr. Sterling, who was approaching with a concerned look on his face. Mr. Sterling, don't waste your time with these people, Marcus said, waving a dismissive hand. They're not worth the marble they're standing on. They probably have an appointment to close a defunct savings account with $17 in it. The manager looked from Marcus's sneering face to Elena's calm, dignified expression. He was clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Vance, this is a place of business for all. But Elena held up a hand, silencing him. Her moment had come. She looked past her arrogant son, her gaze fixed on the manager. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the vast lobby feel small and intimate. I am Elena Vance, she said clearly. I am here to access the Eternal Legacy account, the account of my late husband, Arthur Vance. She placed the ornate brass key on the marble counter. Beside it, Mr. Thomas, who had been standing quietly to the side, placed the sealed document. Mr. Sterling, the manager, froze. His professional smile vanished. He stared at the key, then at the document. The name Eternal Legacy seemed to strike him like a physical blow. His face went pale. It was a name spoken only in whispers among the bank's most senior executives, a legendary, almost mythical private holding. Madam. Vance? He stammered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Yes, Elena said calmly. Without another word, Mr. Sterling unlocked a side gate and gestured for them to follow. This way, please. Immediately. His tone had shifted from polite professionalism to one of profound, almost fearful, deference. Marcus watched, his smug expression faltering into confusion. What is this? Some kind of joke? He and his partners followed, driven by a mix of curiosity and arrogance. What's in there? Dust and old photographs? Your wedding china? Mr. Sterling led them not to a regular office, but down a private hallway to a heavy, polished steel door. He used his own key, plus the brass key from Elena, to open it. They stepped into a private viewing room, furnished not with chairs and a desk, but with velvet ropes and a single secure terminal. It was a space reserved for the bank's most important and secret clients. Please, Madam Vance, Mr. Sterling said, his voice hushed with reverence. He logged into the secure terminal with a series of complex passwords. Then he turned to Elena. Your thumbprint, please. Elena pressed her thumb to the scanner. The screen flickered, and then a single page of information appeared. Mr. Sterling stared at the screen. His jaw went slack. He seemed to have trouble breathing. He looked up from the terminal, his face a mask of utter shock and awe. Marcus, impatient and mocking, pushed forward. What is it? Did she win the lottery? A few $1,000s? Mr. Sterling turned slowly, not to Marcus, but to Elena. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep respect. Madam Vance, he said, his voice trembling slightly, your liquid assets in this account alone are currently valued at $987 million. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. The number hung in the air, an impossible, world-shattering weight. Marcus's mocking laughter froze in his throat. It died with a wet, gurgling sound. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, ghostly white. His eyes, wide with shock, darted from the screen to his mother, then back again. It wasn't possible. It was a trick, a lie. But that's, one of his partners whispered, his voice full of awe. Mr. Sterling wasn't finished. He swallowed hard, his eyes still glued to the screen. And that's not all, madam. The account also holds the controlling interest, 51% of all voting shares, in the North Star Investments Holding Company. This time, the silence was even more profound. It was the silence of a collapsing universe. North Star Investments. The name hit Marcus like a physical punch to the gut. North Star was his lifeline, his primary backer, the source of the endless river of capital that fueled his real estate empire. He had spent years courting their board, believing them to be a faceless consortium of foreign investors. He staggered back, a hand flying to his chest as if to stop his heart from exploding. His entire world, his entire sense of self, was built on the foundation of that company, and his mother owned it. The broke, useless old woman he had cast out into the street. The embarrassment he had thrown a few $100 bills at. She owned him. His legs felt weak. The air in the pristine, climate-controlled room suddenly felt thin, unbreathable. He looked at his mother. She was no longer the small, frail bird he had scorned. She stood tall, her expression calm, her eyes holding not triumph, but a deep, sorrowful judgment. In her simple blue dress, she possessed a power more absolute and terrifying than anything he had ever known. His business partners, who moments ago had been laughing at his cruel jokes, were now staring at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. They took a slow, deliberate step away from him, a silent severing of ties. They were looking at a ghost, a man whose empire had just vanished into thin air. The arrogance, the cruelty, the sadistic power, it all drained out of Marcus, leaving behind a hollow, trembling shell. The world he had built with his own two hands, or so he had thought, was a sandcastle, and the tide had just come in. Leo stood beside his mother, his own mind reeling. He looked at the number on the screen, a figure so vast it was meaningless. He looked at his brother, broken and pale. He looked at his mother, transformed. This wasn't about money. He understood that now. It was about justice. A slow, patient, and terrible justice. Mr. Sterling finally broke the spell. He cleared his throat, his professional demeanor returning, now layered with an almost religious level of service. "Madam Vance," he said, "what are your instructions?" Elena looked at her trembling, defeated son. For a moment, a flicker of pity crossed her face. But then she remembered the money on the floor, the cruel laughter, the years of quiet humiliation. Her voice was soft, but it held the unyielding strength of tempered steel. "My first instruction," she said, "is to freeze all credit lines extended from North Star Investments to the Vance Real Estate Group, effective immediately. It was a death sentence, and Marcus knew it. He let out a strangled gasp, the sound of a man drowning. The war had begun, and he had already lost. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. News of the frozen credit lines ripped through the financial world like a shockwave. Marcus's company, built on a mountain of leveraged debt, began to crumble overnight. His phone, which had once been a constant source of fawning calls, fell silent. His partners, the men who had laughed at his jokes, no longer returned his frantic messages. They had seen the power shift, and like rats from a sinking ship, they had fled. Marcus, recovering from the initial, paralyzing shock, fell back on the only tools he knew: aggression and deceit. He was a cornered animal, lashing out with blind fury. He hired a team of ruthless lawyers, instructing them to file an immediate injunction. His legal claim was as audacious as it was vile. He alleged that his mother, Elena, was mentally incompetent, suffering from advanced dementia. He claimed that his poor, simple-minded brother, Leo, was manipulating her, taking advantage of her senility to steal the family fortune. He painted himself as the concerned son, trying to protect his mother from a greedy predator. He didn't stop there. He used his remaining influence, the dregs of his once great power, to plant stories in the gossip columns. He paid tabloids to run pictures of Leo's impoverished apartment, juxtaposed with headlines like "Cleaner swindles elderly mother out of billions." He tried to turn public opinion into a weapon, to shame his mother and brother into submission. Leo felt the sting of these public attacks keenly. He saw the suspicious glances from his neighbors, the whispers that followed him down the street. He was a private, humble man, and being thrust into the harsh, public spotlight was a unique form of torture. He saw the pain in his mother's eyes as she read the cruel lies her own son was spreading about her. "How can he do this?" Leo asked one evening, sitting with his mother and Mr. Thomas in the small apartment that had become their war room. "She's his mother." Mr. Thomas looked at him with weary wisdom. "Men like Marcus don't have mothers, Leo. They have assets and liabilities. When your mother became a liability, he discarded her. Now that she is an asset he can't control, he is trying to destroy her. His pride is a bottomless pit." But Marcus's frantic attacks had an unintended consequence. They stirred the past. Mr. Thomas began to make calls. He didn't have to search hard. He was merely activating a network that had lain dormant for years. He was calling on Arthur Vance's silent army. The first to answer was a man named Mr. Chen, the owner of a small but highly respected construction firm. 30 years ago, his company had been on the brink of bankruptcy. A single, anonymous investment had saved it. Only after Arthur's death did Mr. Thomas reveal to him who his benefactor had been. "Mr. Thomas," Chen said, his voice thick with emotion over the phone. "Anything, anything for Arthur's family. That man gave me my life back. What do you need?" Mr. Thomas explained the situation. "Mr." Chen listened, his anger growing. "I have records," he said finally. "Records Marcus tried to bury. His first major development, the Arcadia complex. He used substandard materials. He cut corners on safety. His father found out. Arthur forced him to rebuild 2 of the wings out of his own pocket, but he did it quietly, through North Star, to avoid a public scandal and ruin Marcus before he even began. Arthur absorbed the loss himself. I have the original invoices. I have the structural reports. I have everything." The evidence was a bombshell. It proved that Marcus's entire career was not only built on his father's money, but also on a foundation of fraud, covered up by the very man he scorned. Next came a woman named Dr. Isabella Rossi, the head of a pediatric care unit at the city hospital. She remembered Arthur Vance as a quiet, consistent donor who funded their most advanced equipment anonymously. "He made me promise never to put his name on a plaque," she recalled. "He said the children's health was the only recognition he needed." She also remembered Marcus. A few years back, he had made a great public show of pledging a large donation to the hospital at a gala, a donation that never fully materialized. He had used the promise of charity to get good press for a new luxury condo project, and then delivered only a fraction of the promised funds. Dr. Rossi had the correspondence, the broken promises, the contemptuous excuses from Marcus's office. One by one, they emerged from the woodwork. A former employee of Vance Real Estate, fired for questioning Marcus's unethical billing practices, who had kept meticulous records. A community leader from the Northside District, who revealed Marcus had used intimidation tactics to drive out low-income families from the land he wanted. Each story, each piece of evidence, was another nail in the coffin of Marcus's public persona. They were not just business associates. They were the living legacy of Arthur Vance's kindness, a silent army of the grateful, rising to defend his family. Armed with this growing mountain of evidence, Elena, through Mr. Thomas, made her move. She didn't respond to Marcus's slander in the press. She acted. She called for an emergency meeting of the board of North Star Investments. As the sole majority shareholder, it was her right. The purpose of the meeting: a vote of no confidence in the CEO of its largest subsidiary, the Vance Real Estate Group. A vote to remove Marcus Vance from his own company. The final confrontation was set. It would not be fought in the tabloids or the court of public opinion. It would be fought in the place Marcus respected most, a corporate boardroom, with the fate of his empire on the line. The boardroom of North Star Investments was a place of immense, understated power. The walls were paneled in dark, rich mahogany. A single, massive table, polished to a mirror shine, dominated the room. At one end of the table sat Marcus. He was flanked by his lawyers, his face a tight mask of forced confidence. He believed he had an ace up his sleeve. He believed he could still win. At the other end of the table sat Elena. She was dressed in the same simple blue dress. Beside her sat Leo, his hands folded calmly in front of him. He was no longer the frightened, invisible cleaner. The past few weeks had forged new strength in him. He had found his voice in defending his mother. Mr. Thomas sat beside him, his briefcase full of truth. The rest of the board members, a collection of stern, serious-faced individuals, filled the chairs between them. Among them were faces Marcus didn't recognize: Mr. Chen, the contractor, and two other quiet older gentlemen who had been on North Star's board since its inception, loyal friends of Arthur Vance. Marcus began. He launched into a polished, aggressive presentation. He portrayed himself as the victim, the visionary leader besieged by a family tragedy. He spoke of his mother's declining state with feigned sadness. He painted Leo as a simpleton, easily manipulated and greedy. Then came his final gambit. He presented a thick, detailed report. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice ringing with false authority, "the Vance Real Estate Group is currently facing a catastrophic debt crisis, a situation exacerbated by this unfortunate and reckless freezing of our credit. I have spent the last week negotiating a solution, a full corporate restructuring. He laid out a complex plan involving shell corporations, debt consolidation, and the issuance of new preferred shares. The plan was a masterpiece of corporate warfare. On the surface, it looked like a brilliant maneuver to save the company. But buried in the fine print was the poison pill. It would dilute the value of the existing common shares, Elena's shares, to almost nothing, while transferring ultimate control to the holders of the new preferred shares, a holding company secretly owned by Marcus himself. It was a legal, intricate, and utterly ruthless attempt to steal his own company out from under his mother's feet. He was betting that the board and his senile mother wouldn't understand the complexity of the move. When he finished, a smug, triumphant smile touched his lips. He had them. It was brilliant. It was foolproof. He leaned back in his chair, the victor. There was a moment of silence. Then Elena nodded to Leo. Leo stood up. The room felt vast, the faces around the table intimidating. But he looked at his mother, at her calm, trusting eyes, and his fear vanished. He was not a businessman. He was not a lawyer. He was a son. And he was there to speak the truth. My brother Marcus is a very good storyteller, Leo began, his voice quiet but clear. It carried a simple, unshakable sincerity that immediately commanded the room's attention. The story he just told you is a fiction. Now, I'd like to share the truth. He didn't use a projector or a fancy presentation. He simply spoke. He told the board about the night Marcus threw their mother out. He described the money on the floor, the cruel laughter. He spoke not with anger, but with a profound, sorrowful clarity. Then he looked directly at Marcus. You talk about debt. Let's talk about the real debts you owe. One by one, he laid out the facts. Mr. Thomas handed him a file, and he pulled out the first document. This is the structural report from the Arcadia Complex, your first project. It shows you used substandard materials that put hundreds of lives at risk. It also shows that our father, Arthur Vance, secretly paid to have it fixed, saving you from ruin and prosecution, a debt you never acknowledged. He placed the report on the table. Marcus's confident mask began to crack. This, Leo continued, picking up another file, is the correspondence from the city hospital detailing your promise of a $2 million donation you used for free press and the eventual delivery of only $50,000, a debt to sick children you never paid. He placed the second file down. A murmur went through the board members. And this, Leo said, his voice growing stronger, is a sworn affidavit from a former employee detailing a systematic pattern of fraudulent billing at the Vance Group. And these are testimonies from families in the Northside District describing the intimidation and harassment they faced from your agents. File after file, truth after truth, Leo built a wall of evidence around his brother. The final piece was a USB drive. This drive, Leo said, holding it up, contains the real financial records of the Vance Real Estate Group, provided by loyal employees you couldn't bully into silence. It shows that the company is not in crisis. In fact, it's highly profitable. The debt crisis you described is a lie, a fabrication designed to panic this board into giving you what you want. It shows years of embezzlement, of company funds being funneled into your personal offshore accounts. He slid the USB drive down the polished table. It stopped directly in front of the chairman of the board. The room was silent. Marcus was no longer white. A dark, mottled red was creeping up his neck. He was breathing in short, sharp gasps. He looked around the table for an ally, for a friendly face, but found only cold, judgmental stares. Then, Mr. Chen, the contractor, spoke for the first time. "I am one of the men Arthur Vance saved," he said, his voice rumbling with quiet power. "I knew his character. I see that same character in his son, Leo. And I see nothing of Arthur in you, Marcus." Another board member, one of Arthur's old friends, nodded. "The evidence is overwhelming. The fraud, the cruelty, the disrespect, it's indefensible." The chairman of the board picked up the USB drive. He didn't need to look at it. The truth was already plain on Marcus's terrified face. "We will now proceed to the vote of no confidence in Marcus Vance as CEO of the Vance Real Estate Group," the chairman announced, his voice like the striking of a gavel. "All in favor of his immediate removal, please say aye." A chorus of voices, strong and unified, filled the room. Aye. 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 It was unanimous. Every single board member, including the ones Marcus had thought were his allies, had voted against him. Then Elena spoke, her voice cutting through the aftermath. "I have one more motion," she said. "I nominate Leo Vance to be the new chairman of the Vance Real Estate Group, to be guided by Mr. Thomas and a newly appointed ethics committee." "All in favor?" the chairman asked. Again, the vote was swift and unanimous. Aye. It was over. In the space of 10 minutes, Marcus had lost everything: his company, his power, his reputation, his future. He stared at Leo, his brother, the cleaner, who was now the chairman of his empire. His face was a twisted canvas of disbelief, fury, and utter soul-crushing defeat. As the meeting was adjourned, 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. They walked to Marcus's chair. "Mr. Vance," one said, his voice polite but firm. "You'll need to come with us. The authorities are waiting for you downstairs." The finality of it finally broke him. A raw, guttural sound of pure rage escaped his lips. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "You!" he screamed at Leo, his finger shaking. "You did this! You and that old witch!" But his words had no power anymore. They were just the pathetic shrieks of a fallen tyrant. The guards took his arms and escorted him from the room, from his life, from the world he had built. He left defeated, humiliated, and utterly alone, the sound of his own ruin echoing in the silent, mahogany-paneled room. After the storm of the boardroom, a profound quiet settled over Leo and Elena. They didn't go to a fancy restaurant to celebrate. They went back to Leo's small, one-room apartment. It was the only place that felt real. They sat at the mismatched table, a pot of tea steaming between them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The weight of the day, of the weeks of struggle, of a lifetime of slights and sorrows filled the small space. Then Elena reached across the table and took Leo's hand. He looked up and saw tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release. "Your father would be so proud of you, Leo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. And at that, the dam inside Leo finally broke. The cleaner, the invisible man, the new chairman of a corporate empire, put his head down on the table and wept. He cried for the years of being made to feel small. He cried for his mother's pain. He cried for the father he missed, a man he now understood on a much deeper level. He released all the pent-up pain, letting it wash away in a flood of cathartic tears. Elena simply held his hand, her own tears falling silently until the storm passed and a fragile peace remained. They were healing. The wounds were deep, but for the first time, they were open to the light. The next morning, Leo woke up on the floor, the thin blanket wrapped around him, just as he had for weeks. For a moment, he thought it had all been a dream. Then he saw his mother, sleeping peacefully in his bed, a smile on her face for the first time in years. It was real. He didn't call a tailor or a car service. His first call as chairman was to Mr. Chen. "Mr. Chen," Leo said, his voice firm. "It's Leo Vance. That housing project in the North Side District, the one Marcus was planning to demolish. I want to cancel the demolition, and I want to start a new project. I want you to oversee a full renovation of every single building. New plumbing, new wiring, a new playground for the children. Whatever it costs, the residents will not be displaced. Their rents will not be raised. This is not a Vance Group project anymore. This is an Arthur Vance project." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by Mr. Chen's choked voice. "Yes, Mr. Vance, it would be my honor." It was the first benevolent act, the first brick in a new legacy. Leo knew he couldn't erase the damage Marcus had done, but he could start building something good in its place. He wasn't just tearing down his brother's cruel empire. He was planting a garden in its ruins. That evening, Mr. Tomas came to visit them. He carried with him one last item from his briefcase. It was another letter, the envelope yellowed with age. "Your father left this for you, Leo," he said, handing it to him. "He wrote 2 letters, one for Marcus, which I will now never have to deliver, and this one. He asked me to give it to whichever son proved worthy." Leo's hands trembled as he opened it. The ink was faded, but the script was strong and clear. It was his father's final message. "My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, then my greatest hope and my greatest fear have both come true. You have inherited my fortune, and you have faced the trial of your brother's heart. I am sorry for the burden I have placed upon you. I kept my wealth a secret because I have seen what it can do to a man. It is a poison that can make a soul sick, hollowing it out until nothing is left but greed and pride. I saw the seeds of this sickness in Marcus, and I prayed he would overcome it. I see now that he did not. But I also saw your heart, my son. Even as a boy, you were the one who would give away your lunch to a hungry friend. You were the one who felt the pain of others as if it were your own. That is true wealth, Leo. That empathy, that kindness. The money is just paper. It is a tool and nothing more. It can be used to build walls or to build bridges. It can be a weapon, or it can be a seed. Do not let it change you. Do not move into a palace. Do not forget the feel of a worn-out pair of shoes. Do not forget the taste of weak coffee. Let this money serve your heart, not the other way around. Use it to build shelter for others, as you have done for your mother. Use it to be the man I always knew you were. Your legacy will not be the towers you build, but the people you lift up. I am proud of you, my son. I have always been proud of you. With all my love, your father, Arthur." Leo finished the letter, the paper blurry through his tears. He finally understood. The money wasn't the inheritance. The kindness was. The responsibility was. The fortune was just the means to put a lifetime of quiet goodness into action on a scale he had never imagined. He looked at his mother and then at Mr. Thomas, his heart full, not with the weight of billions, but with the profound, grounding weight of his father's love. 10 years later, the name Vance no longer meant ruthless ambition. It meant hope. The Vance Foundation, under the quiet and humble leadership of Chairman Leo Vance, had become a global force for good. It funded scholarships for underprivileged students, built state-of-the-art public hospitals in forgotten neighborhoods, and created sustainable housing for thousands. Leo never moved into a mansion. He lived in a modest, comfortable house with his mother, Elena, whose laughter now filled its rooms. He was often seen not in boardrooms, but on construction sites, talking to workers, or in community centers, listening to the people his foundation served. He wore simple, well-made clothes, but he never forgot the feel of a faded shirt. He had become a respected benefactor, a man of immense power, but he had never lost the humble heart of the cleaner he once was. The North Side District, once a symbol of urban decay and corporate greed, was now a thriving, vibrant community. A beautiful park stood at its center. It was named the Arthur Vance Memorial Park. On a bronze plaque at its entrance, a single quote was engraved: "True wealth is not what you have, but what you give." One crisp autumn afternoon, Leo was walking through that very park. He saw a young man sitting on a bench, staring at a stack of flyers for a local community college. The man's clothes were neat but worn, his face etched with a familiar mixture of determination and worry. He was trying to figure out how to pay for his first semester while also supporting his younger sister. Leo sat down on the bench next to him. "Tough decision?" he asked gently. The young man started, surprised. "Oh, yes, sir. It's a lot of money." "I know the feeling," Leo said with a soft smile. "My name is Leo. What's yours?" "Daniel," the young man replied. They talked for a while. Leo listened as Daniel spoke of his dreams of becoming an engineer, of his desire to build things that helped people. He saw in Daniel the same spark of goodness and struggle he remembered in himself. After a few minutes, Leo stood up. "Daniel," he said, "the Vance Foundation has a scholarship program for aspiring engineers. It covers full tuition and living expenses. I think you would be a perfect candidate. Our director's office is just across the street. Tell them Leo sent you." Daniel stared at him, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning hope. "But why? You don't even know me." Leo looked out at the children playing in the park his father's legacy had built. "Someone once believed in me when I had nothing," he said, his voice full of a quiet, powerful grace. "It's my turn to pay it forward." As Leo walked away, leaving the young man speechless and on the verge of tears, he thought briefly of Marcus. The fall had been absolute. After a lengthy trial, where the testimonies of Mr. Chen and the others had sealed his fate, Marcus was convicted of fraud and embezzlement. He served 7 years in prison. When he was released, he was a broken man, stripped of everything. Leo, through the foundation, had offered him a simple, honest job, managing inventory at one of their charitable warehouses. It came with a small apartment and a chance to live a quiet, dignified life. But Marcus's pride, the only thing he had left, was too great. He had sneered at the offer, spitting the word charity like a curse. He had vanished after that. The last anyone had heard, he was a bitter, angry drifter, moving from city to city, a ghost haunted by the empire he had lost. A man who had been offered a second chance, but was too proud to accept the hand that was offered. He chose to remain in the prison of his own bitterness. Leo felt a pang of sadness for the brother he had lost long before the money ever came into play. But he could not dwell on the darkness. There was too much light to share. He had learned his father's greatest lesson. He was not a king on a throne, but a gardener. He planted seeds of kindness of opportunity, of hope. The harvest would be eternal.